and this is Studio B. Our guest is Bruce Cornet, and let me tell you a little bit about Bruce. He received a BA in 1970 in biology from the University of Connecticut, a master's degree in 72 in paleobotany from that same university, and he graduated from Penn State in 1977 with a Ph.D. in geology and palynology, the study of fossils, spores, and pollen used to age-date rocks. And he spent 11 years in the oil industry. He's got a much longer bio and a lot of information on Bruce on aquarianradio.com. I have a page for him and some pictures. Bruce has been with us many times before. Today we're going to talk about, and I'm not sure what this is because I didn't get to watch the YouTube. There's three of them. The Cydonia. Two.
Yeah, there are three videos.
Yeah, three of them. Okay. Sash, you want to say anything before we bring on? You remember Bruce? We've had one.
Yeah, of course, and we're very, very interested in the Cydonia site and Hoagland's work and everything that's gone into that and how it's changed. Yeah.
So, is this the Cydonia on Mars, or is there something else you're talking about?
Well, back in 92 to 95, I was 94 and 5. I was working with Richard Hoagland, and he introduced me to the Cydonia complex on Mars. And from a video I watched of his presentation to the United Nations, where he claimed that Avebury Circle and Silbury Hill in England are a 14-to-1 reduced size versions of the crater and on Mars. And I thought this was rather amazing. As a geologist, I had already been doing mapping in the Wallkill River Valley. I lived in Middletown, New York at the time, and I was interested in the work by Ellen Crystal and her book, Silent Invasion, and had been out in the field with her many times and wanted to know why there was so much aerial activity, UAP activity, around Pine Bush. And I was looking for anything on the ground that might give me a clue. And in 1992, I recognized a very faint indication of a circular feature that I thought might be an ancient crater east of Pine Bush, New York. And it was about 2.3 miles in diameter. And just out of curiosity, in 94, I called Richard Hoagland and asked him, how wide is the crater on Mars? And he said 2.3 miles. And I said, that's interesting. I mapped the feature I saw in the Wallkill River Valley, made a map of it, and that's on my video. I asked him if he knew what the latitude was for the center of the crater on Earth or on Mars, and he said I needed to contact his other geologist, which I did. And Jim Erjavik sent me a map he had done on the layout of the Cydonia complex on Mars. And on that map, he had latitudes and longitudes, and I was able to determine that the center of the crater on Mars was at approximately 41 degrees, 36 minutes latitude. Now, for anybody who knows how latitudes work, they are from 0 to 90 degrees at the pole, 0 at the equator, and they're the same for any planet, regardless of the size of the planet. So I was rather amazed that the center of the crater on Mars turned out to be at the same rough approximate latitude as the center of the circular feature I had found on Earth. And in getting images of the Cydonia complex on Mars, I was able to transfer those images via a Photoshop to the area on the topographic sheets on Earth and found almost a perfect match, including the alleged cliff, a raised area to the south of the crater, and even that was preserved on Earth. So thinking that there might be something to it, with all of the crop circle and UFO activity in England around Stonehenge and Avebury Circle and Silbury Hill, I thought that perhaps there might be a correlation with all of the UAP activity around Pine Bush. So I got out my topo maps. Yes?
That's a good question. Does that line up with the Avebury? Does the complex in Pine Bush, New York, line up with the one in the UK, in Avebury?
Avebury.
What is it? Avebury?
I don't know what the latitude is there in England. I hadn't paid very much attention to that. It's possible it might be at the same latitude as well, but I didn't check that. I pulled out the topographic sheets for the Wallkill River Valley, USGS 7.5-minute quadrangles, and laid them out, and I measured from the center of the crater on Earth the distance that the Tholus is on Mars, thinking that they would be at 1-to-1 scale, and my ruler ended right at Stewart International and Air Force Base near Newburgh, New York. And right there at the end of my ruler was the Tholus, relatively well preserved, in fact. And there was even a satellite mound to the west of it on Earth called Buchanan Hill. And on Mars, there's a satellite mound, the same size, relative size, same distance from the Tholus on Mars, and oriented in the same direction. What is fascinating to me is that in just below the Tholus on Earth, on the Stewart Air Force Base, there's a little town called Little Britain. As if, I wonder how in the world, you could have a reference to England as well as to the United States, and so there was a synchronicity that seemed to be popping up everywhere.
Set up.
Well, yeah, yes. we know that there's a correlation. Okay, so Avebury is. Do you have the
Avebury?
Isn't it Avebury Hill you were talking about? Or?
Yeah, Avebury Circle. It even has a what looks like a remnant of a tetrahedron on its rim, just as the crater on Mars has a tetrahedron on its rim. And unfortunately, the glaciers did too much damage to the crater in Wallkill River Valley, so we only have the tracings of the river streams that follow the original outline of the crater there. And but what is also fascinating is that at the center of the crater on Mars, there is an X carved into the bedrock there. What? An X marks the spot? So somebody wanted us to know that this was an important area, and finding out that the center of the crater on Mars and on Earth are approximately the same. They're about 38 seconds off, or minutes off from each other because of continental drift. And it's through continental drift and the rate of continental drift that I was able to determine when the two centers of the craters were coincident at the exact same level.
Look, in the middle calderas, is it relatively level, like it could be a place to land a craft?
Yes. The other thing that's important in my videos, when you watch them, especially for the age, the Cydonia II age, about Hoagland and his attempts to map that area and determine the age in his the monuments of Mars on a city on the edge of forever. He goes through all of the crater density arguments to try to come up with an age for Cydonia on Mars, and he couldn't. Basically, he said it's anywhere from 500,000 years to 5 billion years old. And he said there's just no way we can determine what the age of the Cydonia on Mars is based on crater distribution and density. But he did say that there are too many craters in and around Cydonia on Mars, much more highly densely pocked and pitted from craters than most other areas of Mars. And the question has to be raised, why? Why is this an unusual area? So after I had found the Tholus on Earth, and it was the same orientation, size, relative distance from the center of the crater on Earth, I decided to try to see if I could find a face. Now, there is no face on Mars. There is no face in England. You just have the crater over the Avebury Circle and the Tholus, that cone-like feature, but you don't have anything that looks like a face in England. So I didn't know if I was going to come up with anything on Earth, in North America. I did my measurements, again, from the distance between the face and the center of the crater on Mars, based on Jim Erjavik's map, and there at the end of my ruler was a strange mound with a forehead and nose ridge and mouth and eyes, and lo and behold, there's a face on Earth. That is the mirror image of the one on Mars.
My gosh.
This is a mind blower. This is totally blows my mind. And it's located right next to a town in New York called Goshen. And you know what the significance of the land of Goshen is, right? Okay. And the wall.
Yeah, Goshen? I told that. What are you saying? It's called what?
Goshen. It's a town called Goshen. And land of Goshen on the land of Goshen on the Egyptian Delta was where the Jewish people lived. Okay. And
one of the lost tribes of Israel came over, according to Mormon books. Yeah.
But keep in mind that I then went and looked for the DNM pyramid, which I knew wasn't present because that pyramid, the DNM pyramid, is probably the largest pyramid ever built on any planet. And what I began realizing is that if I found the base to it, the glaciers that came down the valley, during the last ice age, knocked everything down. The Tholus was relatively well preserved because there were some hills and mountains that deflected the ice as it came down, but the crater was pretty much scraped off. And I thought, oh my God, the face is going to be gone. I'm not going to find that either. But then I found it, and I realized why I found it is because on Earth it's lacking that the rectangular platform that the face is on top of on Mars. In other words, the face on Mars is on top of a rectangular platform. Okay, this has been pointed out quite a bit, but that platform is missing on Earth, and I realized that somebody had recarved the face on Earth after the ice retreated from the last ice age. It had to have been, and so whoever was responsible for all of this is still around. Okay, and why?
When did the ice retreat? Do you have a date on that?
Yeah, around 10,000 years ago.
Yeah,
between by 8,000 years ago, it was pretty much completely retreated out of the north of the United States and northern Canada. But the face on Earth also has the Guadalquivir River, which is a north-running river, like the Nile River in Egypt is a north-running river, and that river in New York passes right through the mouth of the face on Earth. What? Passes right through the mouth? Now, how, and when I was looking at this and trying to understand it, I couldn't until I discovered an article on the internet that when the Europeans came to that valley back in the 1700s, they found that the area to the south of Goshen and the face were all drowned by a lake, a shallow lake. They called them the drowned lands. And there were islands that stuck up out of the water in various places like Pine Island, Black Walnut Island, and other islands. And they were all given names of islands. That's why when they drained the lake, you still have those towns by the name of the islands as they were named when the lake was present. And in order to drain the lake, the actual path of the Wallkill River at that time went around the top of the head of the face on Earth, and was the spillway for the lake, because the face itself, it climbs up hundreds of feet above the floor of the valley and blocked the lake from draining. So in order to drain the lake, they had to deepen the mouth on the face. So this was artificially done by a canal that was dug in the late 1800s called the Chee-Chunk Canal. And they carved it right through the face. That was the simplest way to get the lower the spillway of the lake, so that it would then exit through the mouth and rejoin the Wallkill River to the north of the face, which it did, and it drained the lands, and the black mud bottom of the drowned lands is now onion farms. Hundreds of acres of onions.
Did they know that whoever engineered this, did they know that they were making this water come right through that place? Did they understand that there was a statue there?
No, nobody knew that at the time. I mean, maybe the people who created it a long time ago and who may have carved it out of its base knew about it, but I doubt very much that the Europeans knew. The ancient Lenape Indians may have known in their own mythology about that face, and they may have felt it was very sacred. I don't know. This is other area for research.
Wow. Amazing. You've been led to this.
And then I found the base where the D&M pyramid had existed down near Warwick. And I find that's another synchronicity, because the five-sided D&M pyramid is, considered to be, the five-sided on Mars. Mars is considered to be the god of war, correct? And the five sides are associated with the Pentagon and and war. And here I found the base of it where it was. It had been knocked down, all of its blocks scattered down the valley, but it's right near a town called Warwick.
Wow.
So we have all of these things, and it doesn't stop there. And if you go and listen to my video, you'll find out that there's something different on Earth than what's on Mars. Between the city of pyramids on Mars and the D&M pyramid, which are on the southwestern end of the Pseudo complex, there is no major structure, nothing of importance other than these little bumps, these little mounds that are geometrically arranged in the shapes of the angles of triangles. And Horace Crater and McDaniels, they studied this, and they have a paper out, and I give a reference to that in my video, showing that these triangles are not by accident. But on Earth, between the D&M pyramid base and Pine Island, which is the base of a six-sided pyramid, that town was built on top of a pyramid base. You can see where the base is, and all of the roads that come into Pine Island come to a single point at the center, where the center of that pyramid may once have existed. And that is mind-blowing as well, that, You want to live on the base of an ancient pyramid, that's the place to move, to Pine Island, New York. And in between those two features, there are two mountains, very strange mountains that represent granitic intrusions that became islands a long time ago, back over 400 million years ago, and then geologically were exhumed by erosion, and they stick up in the valley, and they are named by the early settlers there, Mount Adam and Mount Eve. And nearby, there are two towns named Eden and Edenville. Okay? Now, what the heck's going on here? Mount Adam is in the shape of a four-sided pyramid with steps still preserved on the north side, where the ice wasn't able to carve them off. And it's almost 500 feet tall, which is approximately the height of the Giza pyramid before the top was knocked off. And next to it is this elongate mountain called Mount Eve. And on it, it's carved into a five-toothed key. In other words, a key with 5 teeth in it. And this same shape was replicated at about the same time in England by the Kennet's pictogram, which is a 3-toothed key of the same size with a circle at the base. And the same thing occurs here in the Walker River Valley. As if whoever built or created that crop glyph in England knew about this key here in the Walker River Valley of New York. And so you have, the symbol signifying something. We don't know quite what it signifies, why it is important, but you also have these keyhole burial grounds around the world, especially in Japan. And one has to wonder whether or not they represent areas for portals or interdimensional.
Are they more radioactive? Do they have unusual mineral compositions?
Well, the mountains, Mount Adam, Mount Eve, as well as all of the granitic mountains, that most of which are still buried, I mapped that area and found where they are located in the valley. But they are very ancient granites that go back billions of years, and they contain all sorts of exotic minerals in them and rare earths. In fact, there is one of these granitic intrusions near Franklin, Ogdenburg, New York, that was mined back during the early part of the last century. They went down thousands of feet and mined out all sorts of minerals, hundreds of different types of minerals that you don't find anywhere else in the world. And so this is another interesting thing about these mountains, that they are they have exotic minerals in them, all types of rare earths. And also what I've discovered in my early research at Warwick is that the early inhabitants of the area found a tunnel carved into the base of Mount Eve that goes down half a mile. That's pretty amazing. Somebody was looking for something or wanting to be in the middle of that mountain for some reason. And when you stand on Mount Houston to the north, I have a picture on my websites and in my video, and look towards Mount Adam and Mount Eve, they look like the pregnant belly and breasts of a woman lying on the ground. They really do. And then between those Mount Adam and Mount Eve and Mount Houston, there's the face right there in front of you. So you have the severed head of a woman and her torso where Mount Adam and Mount Eve occur. And I'm wondering if this is just what I'm imagining in this, or if there is some significance.
Wow. Do you have pictures of these things?
Yeah, I show them all on the video. Yeah, I have all of that information on the video and on my web pages. And I give my web pages as well. in the abstract underneath in the text description.
Wow, it's almost like the Battle of Hiawatha and the White Witch Woman, and I bet you the Indians have some stories about this.
Oh, I have no doubt that there is quite a bit of history that is preserved in their stories. Quite a bit. In fact, at the center of the UFO hotspot on the old Oldlands farm between Montgomery, Walden, and Pine Bush, there is a circular or an oval Indian mound that's about 8 feet tall. And off to the due west of it, there is this large circle. It's a permanent crop circle carved into the, bound by the forest there and the fields. And I discovered what that represents through the work of Dr. Susan Martinez in her book, The Lost History of the Little People. And, of course, we do have stories of little people in the Hudson Valley, quite a few, going back to Henry Hudson when he went there. And Susan Martinez shows that that is the shape of a keyhole configuration for a sweat lodge, and the mound is where they built the fire to heat up the stones, and then they carried them on a path to the sweat lodge. The circular border of it is still preserved and can be seen from the air, and that's where they communicated with the spirit world. And I have no doubt in thinking that all of these UFO lights that come out of the ground and go into the ground, that Indian mound is right where the entrance is to an underground alien base, right in the backyard of Stewart Army and Air Force Base. It's pretty amazing. And I have pictures of the craft diving into the ground and coming out of the ground from around there. And my talks that I've been giving on this, both in Albuquerque in August of last year and February in Laughlin, Nevada this year, I gave a 2-hour talk on this information.
Did the military ever respond to your presentations? How do they react to that you're going public with all this?
Oh, they've known about this stuff, Sasha, for decades. I mean, I was putting out all my discoveries right up there on the internet, and I was being visited by the intelligence community in different, naval and military bases. And even though they didn't have an IP address or anything when I was tracking them, the general location, like Langley, Virginia. I mean, what can you think about that? Yeah. You don't have to guess very much that who's looking at my web pages. And when I found this underground alien probe underneath the Jewish cemetery that had landed on one of these islands during the late Ordovician and stayed there and got covered up by ocean muds and buried, and then hundreds of millions of years later, the uplift, mountain building and uplift and erosion has nearly exposed it. And lo and behold, when I did my 24 square mile magnetic map of the area, I discovered it, and it's sending signals out into space from 3 locations at an equilateral triangle every time the constellation Bootes is overhead. And I didn't know that because at the time when I started, because I took 1,800 different stations in this 24 square mile area, built a map with a proton magnetometer, and I would go back to the same location where I started, which just happened to be at the Jewish cemetery at the one of the transmitters coming out at the front of the cemetery, and most of the time it would not be active. The first time I went out into the field to start my measurements, it was active, and I couldn't understand why every 10 seconds there would be this 10 to 15,000 gamma spike of magnetic energy shooting out of the ground at that point. And finally, I began to wonder what the heck's going on here, and I started doing a very mapping the area back and forth with my proton magnetometer, and I found two more of these places. And I realized that every time these constellation Bootes was overhead, these energy beams were firing out into space. And I determined that they're at equilateral triangle. And fortunately, thank goodness, with Bill Burns, who got the History Channel to come out there and do a study on it. And they didn't report the triangle underground, probably for national security reasons, because the darn thing is 565 feet on a side and over 27 feet deep, based on a ground-penetrating radar cross-section on it. So it's an enormous alien mining probe. Wow. That's my interpretation. And it's sending signals, and my friend Scott Stride at JPL said that the center was the information beam coming out, and people had seen this white light coming right out of the center of this triangle area, right next to the cemetery. And the magnetic beams were the focusing beams to focus the information beam on a specific target, which was in the Bootes constellation. And what I also find fascinating is that I didn't realize this until recently, but there is a Bootes void. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
A Bootes void?
A Bootes void, yes.
What does that mean?
And
a Bootes void.
There's this very large area, about the size of a galaxy, surrounded by the Bootes stars, that has nothing in it. Absolutely nothing. No stars whatsoever. Completely blank. Now, how is that possible? Unless something is shielding the stars. There's something out there, very big, huge, and this triangular probe is sending signals out to it whenever it's overhead. But since this triangular transmitter is frozen in the earth, locked in the ground, locked in rock, it can't move. So it can only send signals to the Bootes over a very short arc above the ground, and that's why.
What makes you've determined that it goes from Earth to there, or is it possible that it's going the other way or both ways?
It's coming out of the ground. I mean, I was standing right next to the beams when and they were coming through the rock. There's at least 9 feet of rock on top of the craft, the probe, and I had my device, and I would stick it into the beam. Now, you don't see anything, and all of a sudden my instrument's going crazy. And I'm able to get a direction with the magnetometer as to where the beams are, and they are each sending a different set of signals out, which are the coordinate signals for where the central information beam needs to be located in the sky. And it can only do that for a short period of time when the Bootes is overhead, because the Earth turns. And some friends out there who have seen all of this crazy stuff going on around there, and many triangular UFOs there, they've come and hovered over this entombed triangle in the ground. And they said one time a conventional aircraft turned too soon, didn't go to the red beacon on the nearby hill to turn before lining up with the Stewart Airport main runway, and it turned a little bit early and flew over that Jewish cemetery, and a beam of light came out of the ground and illuminated the bottom of that commercial airline as it flew over, and tracked it as far as it could as it flew over the triangle. So it's active.
Wow.
It's been active for over 400 million years, and I took a Geiger counter out there, and sure enough, it's radioactive. It's nuclear powered.
So let me see if I understand. It tracked the plane, and it changed its aim as the plane moved along.
Yes.
Wow.
That's what they described. it did the same thing that it would do to booties, but of course the plane flew over much faster than booties would travel over the triangle. So it is well aware of what's going on around it. And a lot of people have reported all sorts of anomalies. I actually photographed and collected wild onion plants next to this one transmitter that at the corner of the cemetery. They were growing up and producing their inflorescence, their flowering stage, and they got up to a certain height above the ground. They all turned around and started growing right back down towards the ground. What energy would be coming out of the ground that they would suddenly think the sun is in the ground and turn around and start going back down?
Would you be able to tell whether there's anything alive inside that craft? Well,
I've talked to a psychic who remote viewed it, and she said, yes, it's artificially intelligent. No question about it. It's very well aware of everything that's going on around it. And in the winter, it warms up the ground enough that snow melts over it. And in the summer, you walk into that cemetery on some of the nights, and it'll be 10 degrees colder right over above that craft. And other people have noted that insects will grow running along the ground. They'll see these insects, and they're all glowing, too. So there's a lot of energy coming up. And Sue said that one night she was in the cemetery looking for, UAP in the sky, and the whole ground was humming. There was a hum coming out of the ground. So there's something very active there. And the military has been observed coming in with a caravan and parking along the Route 52 in front of the cemetery. Soldiers in fatigue go into the cemetery, dig holes, put things into the holes, cover it up, go back in, get in their Jeeps and drive away. So they were obviously putting in monitoring equipment to monitor this thing. And they only knew it was there, Sasha, because I published all of this stuff back in 1996, 97 on my web pages. So,
well, Long Island has Montauk, and Warwick isn't that far.
No, it is not.
And
they're in the UFO corridor.
Right, yeah. So there's a lot of tunnels under Montauk. It's supposed to be a tunnel system that goes and some kind of underground. They call it a railroad, but it's more like a like a
portal.
It has a craft, but it's not a railroad. But it goes from coast to coast underground. And so, yeah, you might be getting something from the underground facility there. Yeah, because the military go in there. There's some.
Well, this is all private land. In the valley, where all this stuff is occurring, is all private land. So, and the military or the government has tried to get that land through eminent domain in the past by using it as the excuse that they wanted to build a atom collider there that eventually was built in Texas. And that was one of the locations. And if they had gotten approval, they could have confiscated the land and dug it up and to find that craft. So there are a lot of people who are aware of what's going on there. And now we have these new areas out in Utah, which are getting a lot of attention by, you've heard of Skinwalker Ranch. And there's a series on television tonight, and on that ranch and what the things discovering, and a seismic line. This showed that there was this 1,000-foot long elliptical object embedded in the sandstone below ground under the ranch, and they don't know what it is. But beams of energy are coming out of the ground, and the whole ridge there next to the ranch is lit up at night, glowing. So they know that there's something there, and they know that there's things in the sky that are sending signals down to it. They've measured them, they've recorded them, and they've seen the UFO blink on and blink off. to go cloaked and uncloaked, so they know that there's the stuff there, communicating with something in the ground. And
right.
that craft,
on top as well. So there's
right.
a lot of craft that might be underground.
Yes, and they may have been on Earth for millions and millions of years. This idea that we just might get an intelligent species of from another planet visiting Earth, forget that. They've been doing it for billions of years, and they've been exploring the world. And yet we are clearly being isolated and not overtly visited, except through tweaking our curiosity with all of these craft and lights in the sky.
So maybe they just have their network, and a lot of it's underground, and so that communicates in space. That makes sense. So how does that tie in with Sedona on Mars?
You mean Cydonia?
Cydonia on Mars. Yes,
well,
Cydonia. How does that correlate and tie in?
Yeah. Why is I believe that when the civilization that built these monuments on Earth. Now, keep in mind that the DNM pyramid, if it existed, if it stood near Warwick, New Jersey, it was over 1,000 feet tall, and it was over 1.5 miles on a side. It was enormous. It dwarfed the Bosnia pyramids, Pyramid of the Sun, in size, and but it couldn't stand up against glaciers that were over a mile thick that came down that valley and just plowed it over and destroyed it. And they knew that their monuments were going to be destroyed. They couldn't stop it. So what they did, in my theory, is they built a duplicate on Mars at the same latitude, so that when we recovered from the loss of those global civilizations in the past and started to explore our solar system again, we would go to Mars and we would find that face on Mars, and that's exactly what happened. And they've been guiding us, guiding Hoagland and guiding me. I mean, I've had visions of things downloaded in my brain. And one night, Matt and I were out on West Searsville Road, and we saw this pair of lights hovering at the end of West Searsville Road. And when I turned my camera, my tripod, towards it, it started making a run towards us, and it flew right straight over our heads. And when it flew over our heads, we both felt something in our heads. In fact, my top of my head heated up, and I started having all of these visions. And I had a vision of a circular, sort of a tan-shaped disc with hieroglyphs all over the top of it. And at the center of this disc was a raised area that was in the shape of an egg. And on the top of that egg was a glyph that I recognized because it had appeared in a book on the crop circles in England called The Octopus that appeared in 1991. So, lo and behold, there was this connection. They were trying to tell me that, to go look at Hoagland's material, and just meeting up with Hoagland, that's an amazing coincidence as well, that I should be introduced to him and that he should show me the things that I needed to know to be able to find the original remnants, the bases of these monuments here on Earth. And they had intentionally built the one on Mars, knowing that that we would eventually get back to Mars and discover it, but also we would learn from that about our ancient past, because those monuments were created during the last interglacial over 118,000 years ago. And we are slowly...
Right.
Go ahead, Sasha.
Well, just the composition of the restoning, the redoing on Earth. What is that like? What kind of aggregate is it? What kind of chemical bonding is it? What was it made of, and how was it made?
Well, older pyramids tended to be carved into solid rock, into shapes, rather than stone being built. The D&M pyramid was probably built up by stones, and because there are a lot of blocks, woven blocks scattered down the valley. But the Mount Adam and Mount Eve are made out of solid granite, and the face is made out of solid stone. It was carved, and the crater, which was a symbol for Earth, and that is the other interesting thing. I didn't realize that this is probably what it represented, because why was there a crater on Mars within the 12 anomalous features on Mars? Why was one in the shape of a crater with a tetrahedron on its rim? And when I looked at Earth, I saw that where the rim of the tetrahedron would be in the position of the north magnetic pole on Earth. I show on my video image of Earth where the North Pole would be located, where the tetrahedron had been, but of course it's been destroyed by ice. But on Mars, what it also told me is in order to replicate on Mars, they had to use a bolide that would come down and hit at that very exact spot to replicate that circular feature, which was not supposed to represent a crater. It was supposed to represent the symbol for Earth. And one of the things that I began realizing is that they had to do a lot of target practice on Mars in order to know what size bolide, the speed of the bolide, the angle of the bolide, in order to get one shot in the exact same spot in the Cydonia complex on Mars, where they could create that crater that would replicate that circular feature that had been on Earth. And so, and the fact that there is no crater on Earth, I mean, there's a circular feature, you can see where it's still, enough of it's preserved, but there's no impact structure. But on Mars, now that's another story, because where that crater, where that bolide hit, there's an outsplash apron around the crater, and there are other craters nearby with outsplash aprons too. And I'm surprised that scientists in NASA haven't figured this out yet. I mean, it's all probably because of the stigma of the face on Mars. Oh, we can't talk about that area. We must ignore that area. It doesn't exist. And but in order to have an outsplash apron, Sasha, you have to have a wet sediments underneath. You have to have water in those sediments. And there is just a lot of the craters around there without splash aprons, indicating that the sediment underneath, which they've properly interpreted as having been laid down on Mars in an ancient ocean, okay? But if that ocean sediments still contain moisture in them. And so you have that outsplash apron, and then you have that cliff built on top of that outsplash apron, which is a dead giveaway that it's artificial. And then I saw an image of the D&M pyramid on Mars in Michael Hanlon's book called The Real Mars. And he put out this wonderful book of lots of pictures of Mars, but he was of the unwavering belief that everything that on Mars was artificial. It was not artificial; it was all natural, and that he shows this full page-size image, composite image of the D&M pyramid. And when I looked at it, it was in high resolution, the highest resolution I've ever seen of that feature. And I was totally amazed because of the features I saw through the eyes of the geologist. I saw a huge, giant pyramid that was undergoing mass wasting. Do you know what mass wasting is?
Please explain.
Okay, it's a process on Earth where gravity overcomes the resistance of mass on a hill or a mountain to stand up, and it starts to faults start to form within it, and you get slumps that occur. You see those along highways where they've had steep sides to highways, and you'll have all of the soil suddenly sliding down the side of the hill. And I looked at it, and I saw that the second arm in the 5 arms of the 5-sided pyramid had broken free and slid down and produced this huge slump toe that is about 180 degrees around the pyramid. And I looked for a slump fold at the top, near the top of the pyramid, and then in Hanlon's photograph, I saw it very clearly. There it was, and I saw that this was a giant slump, and it's responsible for the deformation of the pyramid, its shape, why it's not perfect. And then I saw something else which just blew my mind. I saw that on the other side of the pyramid, the left side, you have these series of ridges, very low ridges, one after another, after another, after another. They're arcuate ridges that extend out from the base of the pyramid. And I realized that was soft sediment that was being squeezed out from underneath this enormous pyramid. And when you realize that you have a pyramid that was over 1,000 feet tall, over 1.5 miles on a side, it would swallow up hundreds of Giza pyramids in terms of its size. And you have something of this weight, even in a planet where the gravity is only 38% that of Earth, something of that size on top of a soft sediment, even though the sediment was consolidated, it was not cemented and hard. And the weight of that pyramid would force the water up into fractures that would develop and propagate up to the top of the pyramid and cause the slumping. So that evidence by itself proves that the Giza pyramid on Mars is artificial, absolutely artificial, and that it is squeezing the sediment underneath it out from beneath it. You don't get that if it's a natural mountain rooted in basement rock. It just doesn't happen. So.
And it ties in with the Anunnaki story of how Nimrod came through Mars and created the face. So there's a tie-in with the mythology, the ancient alien story of the Anunnaki. So.
And the Anunnaki also said Prahanikar made Angkor with he would lay his magic sword on the stone, and it would turn to Green's gas, turn to liquid, and he could pour it.
Yes,
coming up on our break. We're coming up on our break any second now. It's at 56 before the hour. So what do you want to focus on the second hour?
This is fascinating. Wow.
You never thought you'd, this has been very frustrating, guys, because, I discovered this back in the early 90s. And I was working with Hogan at the time. I don't want to know anything about it. You can come up with all sorts of reasons why and why not, why he was on it, because it would have supported his ideas. Maybe he thought he was afraid that it would detract from his ideas and his interpretation. But he started this whole process, and with a team of supporters and investigators, and all of the leaked photographs that came out of NASA, and he's made his contribution. And it has taken me 25 years now to come back with all of this information, with modern day technology, with YouTube videos that I can present.
Well, hold that. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Hello, and welcome back to. Oops, little bit feedback. Welcome back to Stargate to the Cosmos. I'm your host, Janet Care Lessin. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alec Lessin, and our producer is Thomas Becker, also known as the Mad Painter. You're listening to Revolution Radio, Studio B, and our guest is Bruce Cornet, and we've been talking about the correlations with Cydonia and Mars complex, the UK complex, and the one in upstate. Before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to the donation button on Revolution.radio. In the top left, there's a tab. You can make your one-time donation, or you can go over to the Patreon button and make your recurring donation. For those who make a $5 a month donation, you get access to the archives. And the archives are back up and running. Are they back up and running, Mad Painter? Not yet. Okay. But you'll be... Okay, sorry. But they will be very soon. Okay, we're getting close. Sash, what would you like to say about our conversation thus far?
Okay, so what we're really looking at is two paths. One is all the evidence of way human interaction. Earth is not alone. It's part of some kind of a interactive system with Mars, and probably a lot further than that. And so Bruce has been giving us the evidence and how it stacks up in Mars, but obviously you've been thinking about the larger implications of all of this, and I hope you explore a little of that. Well,
they also seem to build on, they build pyramids on other places like the moon, and then they build in these craters. So you're connecting that dot too. So what do you think this is all about?
Well, one of the things that stands out is that they have an interest in representing their beliefs and concepts in stone. That in the different types of symbols and shapes. Unfortunately, we can't get into the minds of those who built the Cydonia complex because it's so old. Even the youngest age for the Cydonia complex that I give in my videos is 59,000 years ago, and that's older than most speculative extension of the various ages of different ancient civilizations based on the foundation stones, the unusual foundation stones, and some people want to push the Giza pyramid and the pyramids in the Giza plateau back many thousands of years before the Egyptologists want to push it. And so we are now having a new concept that is being pushed forward, started back by Charles Hapgood back in the 1950s when he theorized that the poles of the Earth had changed significantly. And now Mark Carlotto has published a book called Before Atlantis, and that was published in 2018. It's a wonderful text on his being able to find the orientations of the poles that various ancient civilizations around the world had been oriented, and he was able to cluster them into 4 different poles, such as the Greenland pole, the Hudson Bay pole, the North Sea pole, and et cetera, and associate different civilizations with each of those poles. It doesn't mean that these areas, these ancient sites, were 50 to 60 or more thousand years old on top. It's the base stones on which later people built on top of the old foundations of the old civilizations. They kept those areas sacred, and so we know there have been pyramids built on top of pyramids, and tells in the Middle East are cities built on top of cities on top of cities. And if you go back to the oldest stonework in these features around the world, and he's identified in his book about 70, and now he says he has over 100 different ones that he's oriented to these different poles, and these different poles he put into a sequence that go back as much as 140,000 years, and in terms of, and they're much further back than any archaeologist would even dare to do, for fear that he would lose his tenure at a university by even suggesting that some of these ancient sites are older than 10,000 years. Now they've pushed, because of Göbekli Tepe, the concept that you can have structured large stone buildings made out of heavy stone that far back, that something else was going on, that people are beginning to wonder whether or not there was something even more magnificent further back in time. And Mark Carlotto, who was very instrumental in helping to push the artificial nature of the face on Mars, and he was very much involved in all of that project with Hoagland. He has now got his own book, and he's doing a magnificent job, I think, in being able to create a timeline going back, and it agrees with what I'm finding with the Cydonia complex on Mars. Based on continental drift, as I said, the centers of the crater on Mars and Earth are not exactly at the same point. They're off by about approximately 3,888 feet, which converts to 118,506 centimeters. And we know since the beginning of the last ice age, about 2 million years ago, that the North American plate stopped moving southwest. We have a series of huge Yellowstone calderas preserved in underground, going in a southwest direction, about 32 degrees from Yellowstone towards the west coast. And they've been dated, go all the way back to 17 million years. The last large eruption was 2 million years ago at Yellowstone, which created a caldera the same size as the ones that preceded it in this train of event. Just like the Hawaiian Islands are a series of islands over a hot spot, and that as the Pacific plate moves over that hot spot, new islands erupt in advance of the old islands. And the same thing happened in Wyoming with Yellowstone National Park. Then you had another two more eruptions, one at 1.3 million years ago and one at 630,000 years ago. And this is all information that's on the internet, that's published by the USGS, and I present these maps in my videos on YouTube, and you can see very clearly that the last two eruptions of Yellowstone are in the exact same spot. They are within the larger crater that was first formed 2 million years ago. That
the hot spot.
Yes, that means that the North American plate has stopped moving. It's now rotating in a counterclockwise direction. That counterclockwise direction is what stopped the subduction of the Pacific plate below the North American plate along the west coast and created the San Andreas. So now you have the Pacific plate moving north and the North American plate moving south along the San Andreas, offset. They're about 5 centimeters per year, a combined motion on those two sides. And you have the southern part of North America moving south. In order for you to have no movement at Yellowstone, the North American plate has to now be twisting in a counterclockwise direction, which means that North America is moving, and that New York is moving north. And so if the on the west coast you're having the American plate moving 2 centimeters south per year, then on the east coast you have New York moving north by 2 centimeters per year. And if you plug that in at 2 centimeters per year, 15,506 feet turns out to be half that in 59,200 and some odd years ago. If it was only 1 centimeter per year of movement, then it goes back to 118,000, which is at the end of the last interglacial, just before the Wisconsin Ice Age began. So it's a perfect bracket of time, and it brackets all of the different civilizations that Mark Carlotto has been able to age date, going back based on these different jumps in the North Pole during that 4 different poles he has identified. And so we're starting to see more evidence that hopefully will get more investigators to go out and start to find evidence that would corroborate his work and would also corroborate my work. I mean, the mere concept that you have a face on Earth. I mean, one of my friends wanted to give the face on Mars and face on Earth acronyms. So the face on Mars is called the FOM, F-O-M. But if you do the same thing for the face on Earth, what do you get?
Oh.
So
enemy.
You sort of wonder, okay, I mean, are we talking about maybe, just by coincidence, a conflict between Earth and Mars? Well, as you guys know, there's a lot of evidence for wars of the gods in the past.
Yeah, there's actual descriptions in the Sumerian text that my teacher, Zechariah Sitchin, translated of 2 times when there were invasions by the astronauts, the Igigi, I guess the Nephilim in the Bible, with Earth. First, Anzu led an early rebellion, and he was defeated by Ninurta, and then years later, the Igigi came down for Marduk's wedding to Sarpanit at Babylon, and when Marduk and Sarpanit went off to Egypt, they ran off with 200 of the prettiest hybrids, and they settled in Canaan. And so this is all, it's detailed, and actually, Enki, who had dictated to his scribe all kinds of stuff, basically said, we came here 450,000 years ago, and he calculated his time by how many orbits Nibiru, which he said was their planet, came through the inner solar system.
Wow. Yeah. And now we're pushing Bruce Fenton's work with his theory or hypothesis of the into Africa theory that puts humans back in Australia and the Pacific Islands long before they were in Africa, and
yes.
Sending it back.
Yeah,
it back.
What happens in Swerdlow's thing? It basically said that when there was a war between the Dracos and the Federation, that the Maldecans who had taken shelter with the Martians underground were transported to the Gobi Desert, where they began their attack on the Dracos, whereas the Atlanteans came from a different place, and they were all part of this same campaign. But that's how the Mongolian people and the peoples of the steppes have a whole different genealogy, extraterrestrial genealogy than the rest of than the Anunnaki's descendants.
Yes, that information is now coming out. With all of this new work and interest in DNA, that is the fascinating part, because it's getting more and more clear that scientists have to stop, sticking with their old out of Africa theory and begin to realize that there's a lot more going on that goes back a lot further in time. And Bruce,
Cremo stuff it just shows every level that you've already discussed, including 600 million. There's big human skeletons together with pottery shards and bow and arrow obviously technology of intelligent, organized peoples.
Mm-hmm. Precisely. Yeah, the getting the date down.
At all. The geology and the discoveries with the stories of the different cultures, with Swartvo's information is working with the government, and the government apparently, when they bring you into the inner circle, they give you the back end story of what happened with humanity and how we got here in the wars and what's going on, and then they are interacting with some of the different species in their projects, so they work alongside each other. Anyway, it would be great if we were all organized enough to have this incredible overview of the whole thing, and then the pieces would make sense. But we have all these researchers like, Hoagland. It seems to be not wanting to share, so he's kind of like, it's like an ego thing, right? So it'd be great to put our egos aside and say we're gonna all coordinate this research and not just do the top down where you're at a conference and you're lecturing a bunch of people, but some kind of symposium where all the researchers get together and we're going to piece all this together and do like a big timeline.
Look how much you learned.
In Star Trek. Yeah. Why can't we do it here?
No, that when you had better photographs, that was something, to be able to blow up the photographs to a much more refined level than you ever saw before, and then you start really seeing things.
But if you ever go to, we went to the Star Trek Museum in Vegas before it closed, and they had such a detailed outline of this fictitious future history. They knew everyone was born and died, and this ship launched, and I mean, it was just amazing. And why can't we do that with real information?
They've got it.
See?
Right.
We need to do the same type of correlation that the fantasy people are doing with Star Wars and Star Trek and everything.
Well, you have too many reputations and too many jobs in jeopardy if you start rocking the boat too much in academia. They have their ideas pretty much set down as to what their concept of human evolution and the evolution of civilization on the planet is. And I don't think you would ever get very many Egyptologists to jump ship and to start disbelieving the story that the pyramids were built by slaves dragging stones up ramps. It's just
we never get to the true story, so we just have to. Those who are willing to come together, we need to all come together, and don't worry about those that are sticking to the dogma.
Occam's razor cuts in the end. What's the simplest way to explain it all? And it isn't by these people dragging things along. If you one of the Incas tried to duplicate some of the massive stoneworks, and he had all these. He tried to roll these stones up, and crushed the trunks that he was rolling it, and rolled over a whole bunch of people, and they absolutely could not do that without the sonar and other technology that the aliens used to make Bumapuca.
Right. They come to realize that many of those jigsaw piece stones that interlock had to have been softened. The stone had to have been softened to be able to be molded into that shape. That there just wasn't enough evidence for them being cut that way by saws and then they gradually chiseled down and fitted into place. I mean, you see that. Going over to the foundation of the Giza pyramid, the Great Pyramid, I've seen on one show, one area that they try to keep people away from is where the foundation stones have actual drill holes in them and circular saw blade cuts in them. And there's just no way you can get around that technology was being used way back then. And we just don't have the tools that they used lying around for us to see. I mean, can you imagine if they open up some chamber and find that it's a tool shed for those who built the? What would happen to those tools? They would immediately, be the tool shed would be filled in with concrete so nobody could know what was there. That's how unethical these people are.
Yeah, that's it. Oh, they don't want to look at our government. It's the same thing. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how many times do we have to be pounded in our heads watching this circus on television of the different the political parties, fighting against each other and lying against each other and insulting each other and resisting each other, and for what purpose? Power. That's all they want.
That's
power.
Right. Absolutely. It's like what's happening is people are no longer believing the benevolent common narrative. Everybody in the world is getting this is nonsense. These people are stealing lives and livelihoods and resources from everybody everywhere. It's becoming so apparent.
Yes, and I think that's part of the awakening, wouldn't you? That we are finally having our eyelids peeled back. And to see, I would love for the majority of citizens to finally say enough is enough and just vote all the stupid people out of Congress and the Senate.
Oh, that's an excellent idea.
Yeah. Replace them now. So when and this is partly what I've been studying as an Anunnaki scholar is they have dominator consciousness. The person at top, the golden rule, the guy who's on top and controls the resources, rules, and everybody kisses his ass or he kills him. Right. Yeah. Just the horrific stuff that has happened with the FBI and the attempting to to remove the president of the United States. I'm seeing this, and keep in mind, I came up through academia. I spent 19 years in universities getting my various degrees, and it was a very different environment in a university. It was like a cocoon.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't like the real world outside, and that was a grand awakening when I went out into the world and worked for a living. It was so different than what you hear and see in universities. And now we're starting to see the problem that is happening with all of our concepts. They're being shaken. The very concepts of that are being taught on history of Earth, the history of mankind, the history of geology. A lot of things are being modified now with new information, and and change is happening a lot faster than it used to.
Really, one of the best things that's happening is that people can go off after their own information and do their own research without having to have it approved by people who are dependent on others for tenure and stuff like that. And that's and now that we're all paupers, it doesn't matter if they take away our livelihoods because we ain't got much of a livelihood anyhow. So we might as well tell the truth.
Yeah, it's leveling the playing field, bringing everything down to base level, and I think that is what is going to come out of this. We're going to look back on it, and it gives people an opportunity to change and to think differently. But you also have to have clear reasons for change. You just can't simply change because there's the opportunity. There's just so much garbage out there in terms of thinking, and with the internet and all of the fake news and the virtual reality concepts that young are engaged in today, creating all sorts of fictitious concepts and worlds that they can live in and participate in. They're playing games, and they're trying to live in those worlds. And that really don't exist. What's going to happen when
they're exiting in mass? The kids are killing themselves. My sister lives in Pennsylvania, where you went to Penn State, and I lived and went to Penn State, and she said their nightly news is how many kids took themselves out. Young people, young adults. They don't like this reality, so if their fantasy world's not working for them, and the real world isn't working for them, they just
No, this forces people to understand that everybody's health affects their health, and that if they don't do something about climate change, they're going to starve to death anyhow. And that's the realization. We are all one race here together, and we either survive or die together.
I find it interesting, Sasha and Janet, that I spent 11 years in the oil industry working for oil companies, okay? I learned a lot. I experienced a lot. I saw how the whole industry worked. It blew my mind how much money was being spent on drilling holes. And it just was inconceivable to me that they would be drilling so many millions of holes around the world to extract hydrocarbons and fuel from them, fossil fuels. And but they were also getting tremendous amount of geological data that would never have been acquired had those holes never been drilled. We would never have known what's half a mile, a mile, or 2 miles below our feet. And this is a great boon to our understanding of this planet that we never had before. But now we've reached the point where most of that information is already out there in books, in articles, in papers. So you don't need to continue to drill more holes. But the hydrocarbons that we're getting out, much of it has been wasted on just locomotion, on getting from one place to another, for fueling our planes, for fueling our cars, for fueling our trains, etc. Whereas the basic hydrocarbons are also necessary for our chemical feedstocks for all sorts of products, ranging from plastics to medicines. So what we're seeing with the decline in the oil prices is another contraction of the oil industry. I went through a similar contraction back in 1981, and I saw the damage that it did. Back then, I was living in Houston, Texas, and the Yellow Pages for the oil industry was a very thick book with thousands of different companies in there, from oil companies to service companies. After that collapse in oil prices in 1981, it went down to a leaflet. There was just hardly anybody left. That all these other companies went out of business. And I'm afraid that we're going to see something similar to that happening now, but it's going to open up the opportunity for non-fossil fuel sources of energy to make a move and to come back and to increase.
Yeah.
Yes. So Warren Buffett sold 3 airlines or something. He sold everything. Elon Musk is selling all of his possessions. It's something they know something. These are the top people on the planet. Are they heading to Mars? I mean,
Musk wants to work his workers to death and won't let them get off no matter what.
Yeah, but he said he is selling everything. He put all his houses up for sale. Even the one that was owned by Willy Wonka, he put that one up for sale. He said, "I'm not selling that one. It's sentimental." And then all of a sudden, I'm selling it. So, what do you think is going on? This is we're not going to ever go back.
The rats are jumping ship.
Yeah, they're jumping ship. The airline industry is never going to be the way it was before. You're talking about the oil. I'm going to have a Dan Cooper on in a couple of weeks, 31st, and he said that he's uncovered all these patents, that they are working on the M drive, the space travel. He has a theory that they're going to be releasing these and replacing all the engines with these clean energy fields. We're seeing how the waterways are clearing up. The animals are coming back into the cities. You can actually see dolphins in the canals, and all kinds of sea life are coming in, and you can see them. You can see them. You couldn't see them before because it's so polluted.
Very necessary in order to save the planet, restore Earth, and the thing that the government has to release their stranglehold on the technologies that allow for that are usually called free energy devices and sources of energy that not mechanical like your windmills,
right.
but they tap into zero-point energy. They produce energy out of the vacuum. They already have those already in perfected, but they don't won't release them because of the World Banks. They would collapse. Unless people just realize that you're going to have to pay a certain amount for energy, even though there is no justification for it. If the company that's selling you the energy it doesn't cost them very much to make that energy, but you still have to purchase it. You'll still get a continuous flow of money through those energy companies that will have to maintain all of their equipment to be able to distribute that energy.
Look at systems.
The government could certainly borrow money.
Yeah, but wait, let's look at the whole system here, because the extraterrestrials do not use money. So we've got to wrap our head around, okay, what would the planet look like without a money system? And, money was invented. Wasn't money created by Nanar? So money was a concept introduced around what year, honey? Come on. Anyway. Speak over here.
9,000 years ago or so.
9,000. So we didn't have this money system that we created already.
Sumerians used grain instead of money.
Absolutely. Basically, they had letters of credit, and the whole idea. And Nanar, instead of just having war, he said, let's just get everybody indebted to everybody else, just like Alexander Hamilton told George Washington. And that was his way of using debt. But it wasn't that they particularly had, it didn't matter what the exchange measure was. It was the idea of indebtedness. That's the basic idea.
Debt was what really slavery. We have a corporate economic slavery system here. And if we had free energy, absolute free energy, that would free a lot of people. And if we just moved it. So anyway, we're looking at, because of this COVID thing, we're looking at different ways of doing our governing systems and our economic systems, because obviously, and nothing's working. Our democracy's not working. It's just dissolving before our eyes. Everything's melting away. This COVID thing is going to go on for about 3 years. They predict there's going to be, I saw something like 200,000 people catch it a day. We're going to have 3,000 people a day dying or something like that.
Get used to the fact that we're all eventually going to have it. We're all going to develop our own natural immunity to it. And there's going to be a lot of loss of life, too.
Well, we die. If it keeps coming around every 3 or 4 months, eventually we're going to catch it. We're going to die because we're old. Okay, so it's kind of like what they were talking about. They're going to clear the planet of all the old folks, and it looks like they have some kind of genetic anchoring that takes out brown people. I had a fellow come to my house about 20 plus years ago, and he said he was working for a secret project. I have no idea what his name is, so I can't reveal it. But he said, you see the chemtrails were just starting to happen. I go, yeah, what's that about? He says, well, when we go to kindergarten, we have to get our vaccines, right? Before they met you in school. And then, of course, we had in the 50s or 60s the, what was that, sugar cube we took for?
Salk.
Huh?
Salk vaccine.
Yeah, and that was for, what was it for?
Polio.
Polio, right? Okay,
Polio.
So we've been vaccinated already. We got a lot of vaccine through the years because we would get shots from we didn't know what was going on for years. But he said that in the initial vaccine, they put genetic markers, And then if they want to take out a certain population, the delivery system to activate the genetic markers to activate the diseases is in the chemtrails. But, people talk 5G. So they have a delivery system, an activation system. And it seems like a lot of these people that are brown, black, old, or they have other existing conditions. Now, I was born with one, and I've had people say, well, you could live to be as old as anybody else. But since I have a pre-existing condition, which deals with my lungs, and you introduce COVID, I could be a goner in a couple of days.
No, we know what happens also is that the people, poor, brown, and black people are put in places where the environment is worse. The people are most packed together. There's more overheads and more stress and so forth, like in AOC's district in Queens. And so it's also a result of social practices which discriminate against people of color.
And also they put the toxic plants and things near in the poor district. So anyway, we have all these factors, and I forget what I was saying, but I think it goes along with what you were saying about the oil industry. So that's way down, and I don't think it's going to work to get us back out there. Oh, herd immunity. So we did not really check this. So right now it's out of control. Now it's like there's no holds barred. We're going to do herd immunity. Now herd immunity means that 70% of the world's population has to get infected. And then so we have how many people? 8 billion people? Do the math. We're talking about billions are going to get infected. And of that, a percentage, so let's say 70% get infected. We're looking at millions of people are going to die, just like in the previous plague, the one in 1917.
People are going to die of starvation.
They're going to start starving because there's not going to be a distribution system anymore because too many people will be dying and we won't have food processing and distribution. So the real COVID deaths and the side effects of COVID death, it's the depopulation bomb that they talked about. George Green and others said in the Georgia Guidestones. We're gonna take the world population down 2/3 or something like that. I don't know how this is going to pan out, but if this is really it, we're all in trouble.
Or it may be the thing that goes us to a singularity.
I think it would be easier just to slow it at the beginning. In other words, the birth rate, get the birth rate down, so that when the elderly will die off, they're going to die off anyway, and the number of people replacing them is dwindling. Your population is going to plummet.
Absolutely right. That's Moni Nag showed a long time ago that you should give people a means of birth control, and you give women choice, that people will limit their children to less than reproducing their population. It's just a fact. Right. And so it comes down to justice for women and freedom of information and access to inexpensive birth control methods.
But if we were conscious, civilized civilization that's a level 1 or above, we have the technology to have basically physical immortality. So imagine instead of recycling in and out, living, growing old, dying, and being born again. I hated the diaper phase, right? I remember that. Oh, man. Can't wait till I stop pooping my pants. Anyway, so imagine if we had like the Anunnaki who had the technology. They lived to be 500,000 years old. They're still alive. It's less than a year for them, since the great exodus of the Anunnaki. So, I mean, that's another way of doing society, is that we really honor, respect life, and we produce the technologies that we can live. And I was talking to a couple of geneticists, and they said, we've decoded the human DNA, and we know how it's like an on-off switch in a computer. We can just turn it on, and you basically will live forever, for at least 1,000 years, and by that point we're in escape velocity. So this is a primitive way of doing it, and we're all accepting it. Oh yeah, we're going to age and die. Look, wait, we can cure the disease of aging is curable. All the cancers are curable. We have a 20 and back program. We can rejuvenate people. We can have a person, and we can really be Star Trekky and explore the planet. But the people, everybody at top, they're all corrupt. Anybody's got money, they're all corrupt. They're all corrupt. I don't care what politics they're investing. All of them.
I mean, even though you have these wet markets over in China that's for selling meat, all different types of meat, the majority of Chinese survive on rice, do they not?
That's right. It takes a wealth to have a meat diet.
Right, and so I mean that's where I see us heading for some sort of a limited number of vegetable or seed items to sustain us here in this country. If the meat market starts
that's a big problem.
Out.
Absolutely, people need to be able to understand that they can get protein from broccoli.
Right.
So start planting your garden, even if it's a bunch of pots on your balcony, because you may go hungry. But
absolutely.
How can we do this? We can do the rooftops of buildings. I mean, really start thinking about this now, people, and do it locally, I guess, because the U.S. government is useless. It's not going to help us. They're probably the ones that are putting out this. George Green said that he was in the private meetings with the Kennedys and all the power elite, all the mucky mucks, all the plutocrats, and he said that they were going to do this, and he died. He died this month, a year ago, and I did his last interview. And he says, "I'm out of here. I have cancer. I'm not going to do anything to stop it because they're going to unleash this." And he knew this was coming, and he told us all. And it's like, oh shit!
He wrote it up, even.
Huh?
He wrote it up in his books.
Yeah, he's on his nohoax.com. I think it's still up. His wife's still maintaining it. But and then in the meeting they said, well, we want you to work with the next president. The next president? How do you know who the next president is? Oh, he's a guy named Jimmy Carter. Well, is he a Democrat or Republican? They said, oh, he's a Democrat. He said, I'm not working with no Republican. And they said, oh, it doesn't matter. We picked them all. We just pick who we want. It doesn't matter what party. We just go back and forth and back and forth. So we're locked up in this bullshit game of backing, but they're all rich, and we're not. And Warren Buffett sold his airlines. And
with Nancy Pelosi's $20,000 refrigerator and all her ice cream. Oh my God! I mean.
Oh, I want one of those. I always wanted one of those. I've been in houses where they have. It's like, oh, this is nice.
No, the function of government is theft.
Yeah, people at the top are making far too much money. I think we need a cap on personal wealth. I agree with, we don't need no billionaires. They're not going to trickle down anything to us. They're going to hoard it and put it in their wherever.
Buy back their stocks and then sell them short when everybody else eats it.
Imagine there's no billionaires. What a world we'd have. Anyway, we're getting.
But one of the things that I'd like to make a comparison here is that our concept of our human civilization has been linear in the colleges and universities and textbooks, and now we're beginning to realize that the information that's coming out of ancient texts is that population or civilizations are cyclic, and they go through boom and bust cycles. And we're starting to see that this is exactly what is going to happen here. That we might all be back hunting and gathering in 100 years.
Right. There is something very interesting, though, is that once Homo sapiens get an idea, they work it ingeniously.
Yeah. What they say in the space program and why the aliens like humans so much is that we have an imagination. So we're able to take technology, say they create the intergalactic space travel. Well, once the other ETs created, it's kind of like it stays the same for years and years and years. But humans, every time we create something and we get it working, we go, oh, that was great, but maybe I can do one in blue and I can make this round. And so that's the value of humanity. So I don't think they're going to wipe us out this time back to hunter-gatherers again, because they've been genetically engineering us to be intelligent enough to take direction. And so they keep us controlled by these psychological manipulation systems like patriotism and religions and politics and this constant, what do they call it? Anyway, it's a bunch of mind control games. They're propaganda. So we believe all this. So it's Orwellian. And Orwell outlined it. He told us what was going on. It's like, it's good is bad and everything's reversed. So it's a psychology that was given to us whenever Orwell wrote it. What was it, 50s or something? They told us. See, for some reason, they have to tell us what they're going to do. But we sit there and go, it's just science fiction and this and that. But then before you know it, it's really happening. So this whole COVID thing, we've made movies of it. We had the zombie apocalypse. We had all the pandemic movies. And we just didn't pay attention. So here it is.
Well, if you look at it from the perspective of the whole system, that you got to see that everything's connected, and it's perfectly the way it is. The challenges that we have now are just what we need if we're going to organize into a higher level of functioning.
Right. This is the perturbation, which came in and disrupted and made chaos. But from chaos comes a higher level of order. Back to you, Bruce. What do you think?
Well, one of the things that I see that has having happened in the past is that there appears to have been a world civilization during the last interglacial. Did you know that based on the ice cores, they were able to determine that in the middle of the last interglacial, which is called the Sangamonian or Eemian, that there was a 3,000-year period right in the middle where the world temperatures increased by 3 to 5 degrees centigrade. Did you realize that? Hotter than today.
Wow. A mini
3,000
heat
years.
wave.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this was confirmed at both the Antarctic ice cores and Arctic ice cores. Okay? So
what that time was when it happened? When was that?
Imagine
time?
it basically the Earth got hot, really hot. And there are myths that have persisted of people going underground and living underground in order to survive because it got so hot.
Right.
And so what ended it? That's the big question. Well, something caused it. I mean, we have a lot of explanations for why we're getting global warming today, okay? And most of them relate to fossil fuels. And now, if we can stop it soon enough, the amount of fossil fuels being put into the atmosphere, we can prevent us from repeating what happened 130,000 years ago.
Yes.
And did that cause that heat wave, cause that world civilization to collapse? And did it end up with a number of city-states around different small areas around the world that were independent of one another, but had everything that they needed? They had all the technology that they needed, but the one problem that we see in our world is our electronics, our technology is based on certain kinds of manufacturing, correct? We have to have the right machines, the right knowledge to be able to replace parts. And when your laptop CPU fails, we go to the store and buy a new one. We have to be able to replace those pieces of technology. And eventually, in the past, their technologies failed because they couldn't replace them. And they gradually slipped back into, the hunter-gatherer type of survival. But those city-states lasted for tens of thousands of years, maybe 50,000 years, on and off, and they probably were trading with one another, and they were still capable of space travel back then. I mean, we have good indications of that. But somewhere along the line, that space travel even dwindled down to nothing. I mean, maybe these wars that we hear about are what ended it abruptly. And I'm sort of amazed reading in the book of Enoch of how Enoch told the people of this town not to go over to this area where he was going to be taken up into the heaven, and the people didn't listen to them, and he said that he had to be lifted up into the capsule where he would be rocketed out into space. And even though they don't use modern day terms in the writing, the ultimate consequence of that liftoff with a solid, with a rocket, was that the people were too close to it and they were all burnt to death. So we have indication that these, that we had people, 5,000-10,000 years ago taking off into space in rockets. But where's the evidence for this? Don't we have a junkyard somewhere that is made up of rocket parts?
Probably. You can look at Staples churches. There's an evidence. That's like the cargo cult. So they put it in what they saw. It ended up in our churches and our religious buildings. And then we have the carvings in from the Incan. What is it? The Incan mine. Who's got the ones that Von Daniken brought to surface, where they're in the ships, and so we know that. Honey,
the Maya, honey.
The Maya are spacefaring, and there's stories from the people that are out traveling in the solar system that they've encountered the Maya, and they have cities or civilizations on other planets. So apparently the Mayans actually got out there and they stayed out there, and they're working alongside the Anunnaki on Nibiru. That's like their worker class, but they were given space travel. Anyway, there's all these stories that you can correlate, but I want to address what you said about the planet heated up. So we know that when Nibiru comes in, it has a tendency to heat up the inner solar system. So there's some kind of interaction between the two halves of our double binary star system. When the planets and moons start interacting with each other, it's not just the Earth that heats up, but it's some kind of correlation. I'm not an astronomer.
Basically, a red dwarf named Nibiru, which is the primary of Nibiru, and it comes I hear is that all the inner planets are getting hotter as Nibiru and its associated planets in this big red dwarf nemesis come closer, and so that global warming is a function of many factors, one of which, of course, is pollution and CO2. But the other one is this general heating up of the entire inner solar system.
We're running out of time. I want to give you the last minute. Go ahead, Bruce. Take us out to the end.
Okay. Well, the fascinating part about my discovery is that it is timely. It is perfectly timed with all of the understanding of what has gone on in the past in our awakening, to realize that there have been very advanced civilizations existing on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago, and now we're starting to see evidence for that. Although it's not a lot of evidence, because it's all limited to things that don't weather or rot or decay, such as rocks, stones, stuff like this. But even those monuments in the Walker River Valley were severely damaged by ice. And we're right in the time now in our interglacial where people are saying, well, when is are we going to have another ice age soon? No, not if they go in cycles.
I'll have you back. We're out of time.
Okay.
There's our music.
Thank you.
We'll have you back. Thank you. Aloha.
Thank you very much, Janet.